I want to welcome you all to our public conversation on the Israel-Gaza war with Amira Hass. Joining me on stage is my colleague, Jonathan Lincoln, who's the director of the Center for Jewish Civilization, and he will also be part of this public conversation. Jonathan has spent quite a bit of time in the region working for the UN, including time spent in Gaza. This is obviously a deeply traumatic and difficult time for many people here at Georgetown University. While we want to acknowledge this fact, we also want to acknowledge that it's the job of universities during moments like this to have the type of difficult conversations, debates, and discussions that bear on this topic. Indeed, we have a moral obligation to do so, to respond to global crises, and that's what we're planning to do here today and in the coming weeks. This is the first in a series of events that we're going to be having on the Israel-Gaza war. Tomorrow night, the School of Foreign Service is having a public discussion with several directors and faculty members at 7:30 in the evening on this topic. On Friday, the distinguished American Jewish intellectual and writer Peter Beinart will be here on campus at noon. Moin Rabbani, the Palestinian intellectual, will be here later this month, and possibly Kenneth Roth, the former executive director of Human Rights Watch, will also be on campus later next month. All of these events are on the School of Foreign Service calendar. You can find the details at that location. So the format is going to be very simple. Jonathan and I are going to have a public conversation with our guest speaker, followed by a Q&A session. We hope to end roughly, at the latest 1:30. I'll announce the rules for the Q&A session when we get there. When this crisis erupted, I thought to myself, who's the best person to bring to Georgetown University to speak on this topic? And I immediately thought of who I think is the world's leading academic expert on Gaza, Sarah Roy at Harvard. I emailed her. She said she's too busy, but she said she has a house guest who you might be interested in hosting, and her name is Amira Hass. And so, long story short, I emailed Amira, and she was willing to accept the invitation. And we're very glad that she is here today. Her formal biography is the following. Amira Hass is the Haaretz correspondent for the occupied territories. She's the only Jewish Israeli journalist to have lived in the Gaza Strip in the 1990s. She now resides in El Bira in the West Bank. She's the author of the widely acclaimed book, Drinking the Sea at Gaza, Days and Nights in a Land Under Siege, an account of her time living in the Palestinian enclave of Gaza. Amira Hass has been the recipient of several awards. She asked me not to list those awards, but they're on the invitation that we set out. They're all distinguished awards, incredibly impressive awards. She joined Haaretz in 1989 and has been in her current position since 1993. That's her formal biography. For those of us who've been involved in pursuing a just resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict over the years, Amira Hass is held in very high esteem. Her indefatigable commitment to human rights, to equality between Israelis and Palestinians, and her accuracy and honesty in her journalism has endeared her to many people who hold and share these values. In short, Amira Hass's name is synonymous with moral integrity, and it's a huge personal honor for me to have her here on campus today at this particular moment. So, Amira, I want to thank you very much for being here, particularly at this difficult time. When we met yesterday, you told me that you have friends on both sides, some who have been taken hostage into Gaza, some friends in Gaza who are living under siege and bombardment. And perhaps we can talk about some of them this afternoon. But I want to begin with sort of a big, broad question, take some time to answer it. And so the question is really what is the relevant political, historical, and moral context that we need to understand to help us better grasp this crisis moment in Israel and Gaza? In other words, how did we get here?
And thank you for being here. To answer your question, how we got here, I will not start with what maybe we should have. And this is, on the one hand, settler colonialism in Europe in the 19th century. And on the other hand, murderous, genocidal anti-Semitism in the Holocaust. if I want to think about the existence of Israel and as it is a product of these two, we can say, complementing and contradictory phenomena, and also stages in the history of the Jewish people. I feel a need to say it because I always say that I'm a Jew born in Israel. I think the diaspora was a natural for generations, for hundreds of centuries. The diaspora was a natural space for the Jews. But it came a time when the diaspora kicked us out. So it's important for me to say why I live in Israel, why I was born in Israel. And my parents were never Zionists, but they found themselves in Israel as refugees after the Holocaust. So that's not the issue, but it is the background. But what really more directly brought us to this situation is that the natural and widespread demand of the Palestinian people during the first Intifada to have a state, to be liberated from Israeli occupation in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and to have a state in these areas occupied in 1967, their demand for this state and their willingness for a historical and painful compromise with Israel, because they still belong to their sense of belonging to the whole of Palestine will never disappear. But they agreed for this compromise in order to stop the bloodshed, in order to prevent more disasters. So this demand and this understanding that the world stands behind them in this demand and supports them, and this is the premise of the Oslo Accords, all this has proven to be based on hopes and expectations that didn't have the partner. Israel was not the partner. Israel proved to be the unpartner of such very natural exit from the bloodshed. On the contrary, during Oslo, Israel proved that it is a settler colonial entity because it only enhanced the colonization of the remaining of the Palestinian territory in the West Bank. So this clash between the tremendous concession of the Palestinians in 93, 94 under the leadership of Arafat, and the tremendous hope, a huge hope that they could start and live life, build life not as a normal people, not under Israeli occupation and dictation every detail of their lives, but be independent. The clash between this and Israeli might and Israeli cheekiness and chutzpah, boldness and arrogance, that in spite of all this and in spite of also of the world's interpretation of the Oslo Accords, demolished people's houses, did not allow them to connect to water, did not allow them to build, restricted movement, separated between Gaza and the West Bank, and actually created enclaves in the West Bank, Palestinian enclaves in the West, where all the rest of the territory becomes an Israeli space. So this clash brought us nearer and nearer to the situation of today. Of course, there are all kind of other ramifications, but this is the main clash when the PLO, that was once a beloved representative national movement of the Palestinians, couldn't deliver what it promised. It promised a state, it promised independence, it promised freedom, it promised that a Palestinian could decide where he or she reside, with whom they marry, where they study, what they build, what factory they build, or something. Things so simple, so normal, so natural for everybody. When the PA and the PLO could not deliver this, it was only clear that Palestinians started to opt for another answer and another organization, other aspirations to represent them. This is a summary. It's not the only, but I think that this is the main issue that or the main way to right now to answer your question, with one emphasis. Gaza was disconnected from the rest of Palestine and the rest of the Palestinian population, not since 2007, as people like to say, both Israelis but also Hamas. The process of disconnecting Gaza from the rest of the Palestinians started in 91. So before Oslo and before suicide attacks, because people sometimes associate this Israeli policy of disconnecting Gaza or of imposing travel restrictions on Palestinians in the country to the suicide attacks. But this is false. It started in January 91, when Israel started to implement a policy which we call closure, which actually undid a policy of almost 20 years since the beginning of the 70s, that allowed or in a way respected the Palestinians' right for freedom of movement. So Palestinians moved between Gaza and the West Bank and between the two to Israel proper without a permit. So what I could say is that Palestinians, all of the Palestinians, had their right for freedom of movement respected, except a few that Israel restricted to house arrests or town arrests for political reasons or security reasons. But all of the Palestinians had enjoyed their right for could practice their right for freedom of movement, which entails many things: the right to work, the right to family life, the right to study, the right to build, the right to have vacations, the right to have hikes, many things. Since 91, it's the reverse. All of the Palestinians are deprived of their right for freedom of movement. They cannot practice it, except of a few categories that Israel decides about the number and the identity of these categories. So it's sick people, collaborators, PA officials, workers, businessmen, but all according to Israeli decision, which can change any moment. This, I cannot even describe enough the implications and the repercussions that this policy of disconnecting Gaza are on the people in Gaza. I know people who are 30 years old and they never left the Gaza Strip. I have a young friend. I knew her since she was a child. She can leave Gaza for one reason, from time to time, because she is a cancer patient. So she's being treated in Jerusalem, sometimes a Palestinian hospital, sometimes an Israeli hospital. A friend of hers even once told her, how lucky you have cancer, so you can leave the Gaza Strip. The brother of this young friend never saw a mountain in his life. When she describes him, the mountains of the West Bank, he looks at her like she spoke about the moon, as if she visited the moon. He cannot imagine water flow out, a spring flows out of a rock or a mountain. So I deliberately say these simple things and not, bigger ones, because some things that are so natural for us don't exist for 2 million people and more.
Okay. Now, if you could then get us to October the 7th, and could you share with us your reaction when you heard the news of the Hamas attack and the massacres and the loss of Israeli life? As someone who covered this, who's lived this story perhaps better than anyone else on the planet, Tell us what you were thinking at that moment.
I was in Boston. I am on a kind of a trip outside since the end of September. So I just got to Boston a few days earlier. And I woke up at around, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I saw a message from a friend of mine in Jerusalem. You can't imagine sirens all the time in Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem. Sirens, and they say there is a Hamas attack on the communities around Gaza. So I immediately opened the news, Hebrew news. And the first thing I realized that there was an amazingly daring Hamas, how would I say it, attack on military installations. This is the first thing that was clear, that it was military installations, and they are Israeli casualties, but I assume that these are, soldiers or people, no imaginable number of casualties when you talk about a military clash. Now, I knew that such a breaking out from Ramallah prison outside needed a lot of planning, many good intelligence, months, if not years of work, of deliberations. And indeed, we learned that they completely, in spite of all the Israeli surveillance facilities and soldiers who are there, and patrols that they should have, etc., the Hamas people managed to completely neutralize the whole system of both surveillance and shooting that is surrounding the Gaza Strip. But then with this Saturday, more and more news came that it was more than that there are many civilians killed, that there are some taken hostages. It was not yet known the way that the people were killed. It started to be clearer, I think, only on Sunday, that there were massacres, that were children were killed, houses were burnt. But until today, we learn more and more things about the methods employed by both Hamas military members and probably Palestinian civilians who broke out with them, and also engage in both killing and looting in the localities, especially those kibbutzim that are surrounding Gaza. The shock is tremendous. I know a few people who I've learned now that there are people that I know and they were there, they survived, but I know of people who, I have friends whose relatives were killed or abducted. I also know of people who are active in some anti-occupation groups and they were killed or abducted. I know some old people who were abducted from the kibbutzim. It is a disaster. It is a shock. It is, of course, a military humiliation to the Israeli military and intelligence. That's no doubt about it. But it is also a human catastrophe for many Israelis who live there, civilians and children.
So I want Jonathan to grab his microphone because I'm going to pose one more question and then turn it over to you. But my next question, Amira, is that you're a journalist. You've been in the United States, I don't know, for the last few weeks, few months. What do you think of the mainstream media coverage of the Israel-Gaza war in this country? Let's leave Fox News alone for a moment. But I'm talking about CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post. As someone who lives in Israel-Palestine, who's a journalist, you're deeply connected to this conflict, but you're also obviously, as a journalist, consuming and watching this news. What's your general assessment? What are the gaps? What are we not hearing or seeing from your perspective?
Well, actually, I don't I don't really consume it because I needed to have information. So for information, I went to Al Jazeera, mostly in English, and to Israeli to Haaretz and you know, Palestinian websites as much as they could tell me, and some leftist websites, Israeli websites. So I cannot tell, but by reactions that I hear around me, I see I see two things. It's very easy for the West to relate to the suffering of people who looked like them. So, you know, it's funny about us Jews that we are white. Just 75 years ago, we were more black than black for Europe or for Germany. So this is one of the absurds of our reality. But I was in Gaza in 2009, immediately after the first Israeli major onslaught in 2008, 2009. I was a bit before, then I left. I could not be there because I didn't enter legally, so-called. And then also after, with the attack, with the end of the attack onslaught in 2009, I immediately entered. So I was there 5 months, going from one family to another of survivors to document what happened. And I learned about slain children and burnt children and people who lost their legs and hands and I don't know, and people who were burnt by phosphorus, and houses that fell on entire families by Israeli bombing. A few of the people who were killed were killed from short range mostly by shooting, but the majority were killed by missiles and bombs. So this is another thing that we can learn about the media, is that when people are killed en masse by weapons from above, it's not called a massacre. It's a massacre when the masses of people are killed from short range and, you know, this intimate, by intimate, you could say, killing. So I allow myself to be appalled by both, not just by one or the other. And this is what I see is so difficult to even convey, not just to the press, but to people in general in the West, that mass killing remains killing and remains atrocious, also if it is done from far away, from somebody sitting in Washington and pressing the button, and not only when it is face to face, which doesn't mean that the one is better than the other or one is worse than the other. And I always say I refuse to engage in this accountant work of hierarchy. I don't have hierarchy here. But the West, you see, not only the West, but people tend to place suffering or killing in a sort of, to arrange them according to some hierarchy. And I think this is an omission and even an offense by many.
So I want to bring Jonathan into this conversation. A comment, an observation, anything that you would like to contribute. We'd love to hear from you.
I don't know if this, okay. Thank you, even for the slightly unexpected seat at the podium, but thank you so much. It's really, I mean, it's not great to be here by any stretch of the imagination at all, but thank you for the invitation. And thanks, Amira. I guess every question that seems to pop into my head is somehow, you know, especially thinking about the future, seems so absurd to a certain degree, just because obviously things are happening on the ground, and the gravity of the situation, I think, is so clear. But as one of those few people who have an insight into both societies, both Israeli society and Palestinian society, And especially considering that this has come at what probably on October 6th was probably a moment of profound division in both societies. How sorry to be leading maybe the question, but how do you see the implications moving forward? I'm thinking at the beginning of what you said about the split and also of the Palestinian national movement, and also the role of the Palestinian Authority moving forward, and Hamas in that constellation, and then of course on Israel.
You, of course, refer to the tremendous rift in Israeli society that has been evolving over the past 10 months almost, 10 months since Israeli government announced kind of a judicial overhaul that actually proved that tyranny and restricted civil and human rights cannot be restricted only to one area and spills over. So what this attack has done is that that actually it both deepened the rift between the two warring camps in Israel, between the Likud, Netanyahu supporters, and the religious messianic fascist right wing, and the rest of the population, which I sometimes call liberal militaristic. It's the people whose military ethos was very identical to the ethos that we might think is contradictory, even the ethos of welfare society. This is the old Israel of labor movement and today's more centrist movements that connected both things: military perfection or military service and military service to the nation, and a sense of a society that where guarantee for the other is since like a basic foundation. Now, this has been eroded. The Israeli welfare society has been eroding for many years already, and we say that the substitution to it became the settlements in the occupied territory, where people can upgrade their socio-economical conditions to the level of would-be welfare society if there were a welfare society. So the welfare system, I know that here in the States to speak about a welfare system, a welfare society, is like science fiction. It's considered totally communistic to have medical health care, for all. But I hope that you know what I'm talking about. So in a strange way in Israel, there is still this ethos, even though it has been eroded, or since in the 80s, the services of the welfare society, still there is an ethos that there should be access of everybody to health and education and other services. No matter what the practice is, how it is done in practice, but this is the ethos. And this is somehow an ethos shared by this group of liberal or militarists. So the rift between them and the self-acknowledged right wing, fascist right wing, and Bibi, is deeper now because everybody sees that the fact that it was so easy to attack so many people, and that that it is connected to the failure and neglect of this area, is connected to the general neglect under Netanyahu's government's neglect of the population and its needs, whenever it is not the natural base of Netanyahu. Even though some of the cities near near Gaza, Israeli cities or towns, are inhabited by people who are supposed to support Netanyahu. but they are poor, so he doesn't care about them. So it goes together. So in that sense, the rift has deepened. I just saw a video early this morning, when one of the ministers of the fascist right wing came to pay condolences to some of the survivors who are now located in some hotels. And one of them shouted at her, told her to get out, you bunch of fascists, don't be here, you have the nerves to come, you don't belong. And this happens also in military bases when some Israeli ministers come and they are being chased out. And the fact is that most of the ministers did not dare to show up in all those areas. They did not dare, or they did not care. I guess it's both of it. Both of it is true. On the other hand, all these people who were demonstrating for months now and promised not to go and said that we cannot serve in the army because we don't believe in the government that sends us to the army or recruits us to the army, they all now are back to service. I mean, either the pilots who bomb Gaza or the soldiers who might go now to the land invasion. And there is also among those people, we knew that they were not, they did not change, but they contribute to the witch hunt that exists today against anybody who dares to speak or to ask to pay attention to the tremendous catastrophe, the tremendous suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinian civilians in Gaza. So many people who dare to say something. For example, there is an Orthodox Jew journalist, Israel Fry, his name, who said Kaddish, like the prayer for the dead Palestinians and Israelis, and he had to hide because there was a mob coming to attack him. So we see this contradictory deepening of the rift, and at the same time, national unification behind the disregard of what Gaza is going through, civilians in Gaza, disregard of the context, the general context. They don't want to hear about the context, and even calls for further attacks that border, in my opinion, that border calls for genocide.
Jonathan, do you want to follow up? Because I don't want to dominate the conversation here, so go ahead.
So in terms of Palestinian society, I mean, in terms of the internal divisions that we are euphemistically, what at times has been pretty much an open civil war, and at times, you know, more political engagement. But how do you see the movement going forward?
PLO and PA become more and more irrelevant. We see it, for example, today. Now the West Bank, people in the West Bank are facing unexpected and something that I've been warning about for years. Wave of Israeli violence, of settlers' violence, that exceeds the waves of violence that we knew just until 2 weeks ago, that already were on the rise. And the PA is very obedient to Oslo. The Oslo Accords, which forbid the PA policemen and National Guards to protect their own people from Israeli, not military attacks, civilian attacks of settlers, because it forbids the Palestinians to deal with Israelis, to apprehend them, to stop them, to arrest them, to prosecute them, or to fight them if they attack a Palestinian. Especially when it is in areas where there is full Israeli military control. That is called Area C, if you know. So the PA did not even try to find other ways to protect its own people who are on a regular basis subject to terrorizing attack, to terror and intimidation and active acts of expulsion perpetrated by settlers. And those settlers are always assisted by the army, directly or indirectly, by the Israeli police that doesn't follow and doesn't arrest, and the Israeli courts or prosecution that doesn't prosecute or doesn't or is satisfied with very lenient sentences. And this has been going on for 30 years, almost 30 years. So, and all the time on increasing and increasing. So we have a Hamas movement that, according to polls, only maybe 30% of the population or so would have voted for it in normal times. And even less feel an ideological connection to the philosophy of political Islam. But it becomes a stronger and stronger entity in the Palestinian political body, not only in the country, but outside in the diaspora, and even more so in the diaspora, because it dares to challenge Israel and to humiliate Israel, and the way he did now, and to have a discourse which seems more, which is not complacent or not complicit with Israeli aims and Israeli narrative. Now, for me, I think that Hamas motivations in this attack, we have different, there are different versions now or interpretations because it's too early we don't have enough information. Now, for example, was it so successful, this attack, the military part of it, because Hamas is so smart and planned so carefully, or because the Israeli mistakes and omissions and neglect was so enormous? Or maybe it's a combination. It's a very rare combination of the two. Many of the things, if there was more attention, military attention, on the 3-4 hours of that night to what is happening, maybe the attack would have been much less wide and still very daring. So it's too early to say. But I think that Hamas now must have more inspirations than just the release of all the prisoners. You don't have such a major attack with so many Israeli casualties only for, it's not a minor demand in the Palestinian eyes, but I don't even think that Palestinian prisoners would like to know that they are being released thanks to the killing of 50,000 Palestinians or 40,000 Palestinians. I don't think that I have some friends in prison. I don't think that they would like to be released knowing that they owe it to the death of so many. I'm not talking about the Israelis, the Israeli death. So I think that Hamas is taking the lead now in the Palestinian politics. I think that people they didn't dare much before, and they don't dare now, or they don't think it fit to challenge Hamas in several of its premises. For example, one of the questions that I asked in former rounds, and I will ask again now, if you prepare so well for a military attack, why don't you prepare yourself on the civil aspects? Why? You know that Israel will attack, will retaliate. So just make sure that people have water. This night, I was busy writing about the water situation. There is no water. Why don't you prepare ahead and make sure that you have the grid will not work anyway, but that you have in your tunnels, I don't know how many thousands of tanks of water for the people to help their sumud under the attacks. I don't know. Things, but the preparation is not civilian at all. It seems to me that these considerations are not important for Hamas, that they look to the long range, 50 years, 100 years. The number of bodies now is not very important. What's important is the goal. But is the goal the liberation of all of Palestine and, turning the Jews there to not to citizens, but to subjects of another religion? I don't know, because sometimes they say this and sometimes they say that they want. Is the aim to appeal to the entire Palestinian diaspora? Is the aim to be part of a rejuvenation of an Islamic revolution in Arab states? I don't know. But I feel that with this, first of all, that the Israeli mission to wipe out Hamas is a hallucination. They don't understand the power of Hamas and the presence of Hamas in the Palestinian society outside. But all this time, I see that the people of Gaza were not a major consideration for Hamas leadership.
Okay, so the audience has been sitting patiently. If anyone wants to ask a question or a comment, there's a microphone that I'd ask you to line up behind, and we'll take as many questions and comments as possible. While you're doing that, we have this freedom of expression rule here at this university. And I'm going to ask Grace to read it out. It's sort of a standard statement that we're obligated to read out. So maybe Grace, you can make that statement, and then we'll take the first question or comment. Go ahead.
Thank you for coming to this session. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speaker, it is expected that everyone in attendance will respect the right of the speaker and the organizing centers to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption to the event's activities. Now there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question. In the interest of time, we ask you to be concise and ask only one question.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that if anyone is here to give a speech, you will be cut off, but we also want to hear from you. So you can ask a question, a comment, and then we'll get Amira, and if Jonathan, you want to weigh in at any moment, please weigh in. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Adriana. My question is, following the Israel-Palestine conflict that is, very much polarized right now, there has been an increased division and outrage across the globe, with many citizens being scrutinized in various countries for their support in Palestine. So my question is, how can the media and, individuals effectively communicate that support for the Palestinians' cause, not being synonymous with the support for a group like Hamas?
Actually, the answer is in your question, because you can support Palestinians in their struggle for liberation and for independence, and pointing out at Israeli decades-long oppression and occupation. But at the same time, you don't have to embrace the methods of Hamas or embrace the ideology of Hamas. How you do it, how will people listen to you in these times? I think that now it's really very difficult. But right now, I'd say that it's very important. The call of groups such as Jewish Voice for Peace and others, the call for ceasefire is very important. So there must be pressure on your politicians, on your government, on other governments. First of all, to hold this disaster before my fear becomes true. Fear of genocide becomes true. We have to stop it long before. But then I think people who do support Palestinians, I feel nothing will stain your support of Palestinians or your being Palestinians if you say that the methods that Hamas resorted to were not right, were not, I mean, everything, every word is dwarfed by the reality, that the liberation movement should know how not to, as some say, how not to compete with the enemy. On the contrary, that the liberation movement has to maintain the higher moral ground, and that if you, I don't care so much about, like the international law is not very favorable with people, repressed people. It's morely, as from my experience. But still, if Palestinians go to the High Court, to the ICC in The Hague, and demand to examine Israeli crimes of war, so they should know what a crime of war is, or what crimes against humanity are. This is very deplorable that Hamas did not use its discipline that it has over the people to instruct them to behave differently. Some say that it encouraged them in the manuals they received, the Hamas armed men, in the manuals, that they were instructed to kill as many, and it didn't say if only soldiers or civilians. But I think that people who support, and for Palestinians, we can do both. We can do both and not forget the context. Not forget the context that, and in a way, I have to add this. It is very painful for me, as you see, this Saturday and what's being unfolded ever since about the atrocities. It's difficult for me also to see how many of my Palestinian friends either don't, I don't want to talk, even don't say something about it, or do not express their sorrow, or think that it's propaganda. They cling to 2 or 3 facts that were exaggerated or fake information that was published, and ignore the majority of details and information which is accurate. And there are people who were supportive of it, as revenge, as let them know what is suffering and all this. So I'm painful. It pains me. But at the same time, it teaches me that as much as I thought that I knew what occupation was, and I knew what the oppression was all these years, because I live among Palestinians and talk to them all the time, I probably have underestimated or could not grasp the enormity of this oppression that produces things that are not natural for human beings and for Palestinians. I think that through this terrible day, one day, and the Palestinian reactions to it, I grasped more than ever before how Israeli rule is that I describe in so many details, but how cruel it is and has been, and suffocating it is for so many people.
Next question or comment.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Caleb, and I feel like I've just had a lot of thoughts over the past few days that have kind of come together. And so I have a question, but I'm afraid it's going to be kind of nonsensical and long. So I myself am Jewish American, and I grew up, I think, as many other Jewish Americans did, with this story that we were told that was kind of, you could say, very much part of the way that we saw Judaism, which is that, you know, Jews were persecuted for millennia, the Holocaust happened, and then now there's Israel, which is this amazing savior, and Israel is seen kind of as more of an idea and a concept than a country. And this is the view that so many secular Jews have in the United States. And I would see these infographics on Instagram, in social media in the days after the attack. There was one that said, you know, this was the most Jews killed in a single day since the Holocaust. And I think the fact that it says Jews and not Israelis is showing how many Jewish people, and you could say, you know, supporters of Israel, are seeing this as solely a religious context and painting it as anti-Semitism really, or solely anti-Semitism, ignores so many things. And because I think we ignore the fact that Israel is this complex place and not just a concept, so much of the Western media has ignored the politics within Israel. There was this op-ed in Haaretz a few days ago that was blaming Netanyahu for basically, you know, having his super far-right coalition, creating the policies and the stranglehold on Palestinians that basically led to this happening. But so much of the internal politics within Israel, the fascist coalition that currently leads the government, has been ignored. And there's obviously, as you said, these huge divides in Israel that haven't been talked about. It's just kind of been said like, oh, this is Israel's 9/11. But there's so much. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time of phrasing.
I'm going to ask you to, you know, just get to the conclusion.
Yeah, the conclusion is what do you
everyone.
think this says about Israeli politics in the future, and how, you know, how it's going to change after this?
I think that in the short term, the Israeli right wing and the Netanyahu's coalition will overcome it. They will use it as a positive thing for themselves. Here they're already united, though they always keep the rifts with the other sides of Israel. I think that they enjoy now a support, a Western support, and also Arab support, unfortunately, much more than they had, especially the Western support, just on the eve of this attack. You know, Biden wouldn't meet with Netanyahu, and he met him shortly in New York since Netanyahu was re-elected. But now he's coming to Israel. So, and at the same time, the messianic, fascist, right-wing religious parties, as I said, and I have to go and emphasize it again, are on the verge of committing mass expulsion in the West Bank. So the Israeli settler colonial project is not being stopped now. On the contrary, it was boosted. So for the time being, we see, I don't know how many years of more suffering and more success of Israeli settler colonialism in the West Bank and also in Israel against Palestinian citizens, because there is an ongoing repression and discrimination of Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. So in that sense, the project, the settler colonial project, has not received a blow. And maybe because it is so bloodthirsty, it even it is enhanced. Yeah. Now, how long can this proceed? Don't know. I can warn about things. I can recommend. I cannot, and I refuse to prophesize. So I would say, the rule that was true on the eve of this attack is true now. There is no normalcy with occupation and discrimination and apartheid and settler colonialism or whatever. Because the Israeli Jews eluded themselves for years that this ours is normal life, and completely ignored the abnormalcy about this Israeli regime and Israeli policies. Now the attack proved in a very painful way that there is no normalcy with occupation. I hope that we can go to what we hoped for many years, to be in the political, diplomatic, international means. Will tell Israelis and Israel that occupation is not normal, that to live normally under occupation is an oxymoron, by means of sanctions, by boycott. By means of boycott, You hear me? By diplomatic means. Israelis have to understand that this is not normal. When we are attacked, when there is a military attack against civilians, and in such an atrocious way, it is easy for Israelis to conclude that this is a continuation of Holocaust or pogroms or whatever, and decontextualize it. But if, for example, Europe came and said, okay, from now on, and this I was asking diplomats long ago, Israelis cannot enter Europe freely anymore because Israel does not abide to the international law that we are committed to, or to human rights that we are committed to. So let's make the Israelis need a visa to enter Europe. And in the application for a visa, you have to answer a few questions. Are you a settler? Have you committed war crimes? Have you killed children? Have you killed civilians? I don't know, things like this. Israelis have to grasp that this is not normal. I think that there was a moment during the demonstrations in the last month that the bloc against the occupation felt it can reach more Israelis and tell them that occupation is abnormal and that we occupy. And this is because people felt that this the same methods in a different way that are used to suppress Palestinians, and the same way of thinking is used now by the Israeli right wing against the rest of the population. Now again, the Israelis are united in the sense that we are endangered, and that any military conflict can end up in pogroms like attacks like this. We have to go back to tell that, first of all, as I said, ceasefire is the first demand, and of course the restoration of all supplies of electricity, water, and fuels to Gaza, and stoppage of all bombardments. This is now the most urgent demand. Later on, we have to remember that the context remains the context, and to prevent the expulsion from the West Bank. For this, the king of Jordan already said that he would not allow for Israel to expel Palestinians to Jordan. I hope that America and Britain will listen to him. But the context, then we have to remember, the context will remain the same context. So we have to find the ways to, again, afterwards, to tell Israelis, to show Israelis that there is no normalcy with occupation.
Okay, we have a lot of people lined up. So 2 questions now, one after the other, and then we'll get answers. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for being here and for your very informative account of what's happening. My question relates to public opinion. And the reason I ask this is because I believe the efforts to prompt governments, both the US government and governments in Western Europe, to put more pressure on Israel haven't been very effective. I mean, Germany has already prohibited pro-Palestine demonstrations. So the question, do you think it's realistic for any centrist forces within Israel, like the Labour Party or Yesh Atid, to actually challenge the approach of collective punishment as casualties mount? And in relation to that, you've talked about the public opinion of the Likud with the judicial overhaul and the demonstrations in the last month. Do you think that this opinion has completely shifted? And then now that the public is in fact behind, this firm stance on security that the Likud has? Or do you think that there are still people who are skeptical of Netanyahu and his government?
Got it. Thanks. Next question.
Yeah, thank you again for speaking today. First of all, short comment. I disagree with the naming of the event because it's not a war. The French and the Algerians did not have a war. It was liberation. You have colonizer and colonizer, and language is important. And you warned about the upcoming genocide. It's already happening. It's not, we have to act before it happens. It's already happening. The genocide is happening. And one question I had is not really for me, is like just to know how to answer other people who are asking me. I'm Palestinian, and a lot of people are coming to me asking me, how do you protect yourself while speaking up for Palestine? How can I speak up for Palestine without having my face on a Twitter page saying that I am a terrorist? How do I protect myself to speak up for Palestine without like having my face on Canary Mission or being taken pictures of or being stabbed or even shouted at? And I just want to know how you protected yourself from that. And if we have enough time, I would also like to hear what you think is the responsibility of academic institutions like Georgetown to do in these situations to stop the genocide that's already happening.
The first one, I must say that I doubt now that the public opinion in Israel is very vindictive, very vengeful now, and it's very difficult to convince parties such as Yesh Atid or Labor to stand up and to be different. I think that there are some kind of moderate personalities, so-called moderate, who also called for a major wipeout of Gaza as retaliations, things like that. But at the same time, their hate, justified hate of Netanyahu, and the rift still exists. So, and probably even got stronger by the because after the Saturday attack and the proven neglect of the army and all the system to these areas, but also people understand that he is in alliance. He is in alliance with the fascist right wing, also because of his personal future. He wants to evade from court sentences. So how will these two facts evolve in the future? Will they be politically wise? Because we already see that one party, one right-wing mainstream party joined him, the party of the National Bloc or something, with the former chief of staff, two former chief of staffs. So Gantz and Eisenkot. So how this will evolve later, I don't know. I want to hope that people will be reasonable, but it's hard to tell. And it's hard to tell if it is while the atrocities perpetrated against Gaza and the West Bank in the West Bank are continuing and might cause irreversible, or they're already causing irreversible situations. Now for the other questions, I will not argue about definitions. I describe now. It's not. We are almost 3,000 people killed in Gaza. I guess 15,000 wounded. There is no water. There is no electricity. You know, we can compare it to other areas that masses of people were killed. Ukraine, Syria, and masses. So definitions sometimes I feel that derail us from the content. And I think about the content we agree. You call it liberation, okay. I mean, you are here, and yes, people in wars of liberation or struggles for liberation, there were many civilian casualties like in Gaza. If people in Gaza call it liberation, I'm not sure. I talked to them. They didn't say this word. But as you say, you are a Palestinian. I will not, this is your right to call it the way you want and the way you see fit. Now, I've been attacked over the years. I've been in danger over the years. But of course, I'm privileged. I admit it. I'm Jewish, and I write for a very respectable mainstream paper that has become more and more of Israel because the reality is so extreme. But I'm protected. But it doesn't mean that I am totally protected. The right-wing Jewish groups have targeted me also in one way or the other. I was called a traitor. I'm proud to be a traitor. But it's true that Israel so far, until now, has been a democracy for Jews. Of course, it's an oxymoron because you cannot be a democracy just for one ethnic group. But I enjoyed this, that I knew that my job was not threatened in general terms. I was not going to lose my work. I was not put in jail. I was arrested twice when I entered Gaza, so-called without illegally, but it was very minor. It was nothing big. I have friends, yes, I have friends, Israeli Jewish friends who were arrested and put in jail, but it's not that terrible. It's not like being a dissident in Soviet Russia, in Soviet Union, or in Putin's Russia, or in apartheid South Africa. Not at all. For us to be dissidents has been always much easier than it was for others. Though the present government shows that it's going to stop it, that it's not going to be so lenient as it used to be with Jewish dissident voices. You had another question about the academia.
Yeah.
Look, I as somebody who I was entering the academia, and then the first Intifada started, and I said, bye-bye, I don't want to know anything about it, and I started to be involved in activism, and then for making a living, I joined Haaretz as a copy editor, and things evolved from there. But I would say I don't think that academia is very different from other parts of the society. So my expectations of academia are not necessarily different from other parts of the society. I don't moralize them, or I don't put them on a higher moral ground. I think that they should be at least be faithful to the obligation to be accurate, to know the facts, to show the facts, not to fear the facts, and to remember history, to know history, to take the right conclusion. I mean, not the right, it's not, but to learn from history. And I think that even here we see many places that fail.
So we have about 15 minutes left and a lot of people in line. So we're going to start taking 3 questions back to back, as succinct and concise as possible. And also, Amira, if your answers can be like that as well, we'd appreciate it. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for coming. I just wanted to ask, how important do you think is continued U.S. military and diplomatic support for Israel in allowing for the brutality of these retaliations and the more broadly, the radicalization of the Israeli settler colonial project? If it were to cease, would it have a significant impact, or do you think it's become radicalized enough where it would just continue autonomously?
Hi, just standing up here in the last few minutes, I was notified of another family friend who was killed last week in the attacks. What do I tell my family, my friends who are scared that Jews around the world, that Israelis who are part of this liberal militaristic group that you mentioned, what do I tell them to explain to them that the occupation is untenable, that this status quo can't continue? Because in their eyes, they think we can just keep doing this and keep having an occupation like this. What do I tell them?
Okay. One more question, we'll get some answers.
Thank you, Amira, for doing your work and being here. My question is, are news media outlets being unjournalistic by not using the term genocide to describe the atrocities in Gaza right now?
Forget the terms. Let them describe the reality. We can argue about the terms all the time, but not about the accurate description of the reality. You can later on, but what's important is the description. I want, instead of saying whatever definition, I will take more 50, I will take 10, 20, 30, 40 paragraphs to describe the unbearable situation of Gaza today. And I think it appeals more to the people than just exposing them to more definitions that are controversial, because the details are not controversial. I think that the American support to Israel is extremely important, and has been always a message to Israel that it can continue and continue and continue in this occupation. And what do you say to the neighbors or to your family? You just tell them that if people want to live freely, I don't know. I mean, you know, like I could tell that you would tell your family in Gaza or your family in the in Israeli localities outside of Gaza. I think that now we need less to say. I mean, it just that I think that the message has been clear in this week that if there are two peoples in this country and one is so oppressed, the other one cannot expect to live freely and happily and luxuriously, more or less, all this time. I think that it was a very clear message. How the political, how it will evolve politically, we still have to see. While we cannot undo history and its atrocities, we can now amend things and strive for a different future that is based upon the premise that without rights for both peoples, an acknowledgement of the past and the injustice caused by one people to another, there can be no normal life in this, or no good future in this place.
Amira, this is a terrible time, an awful time. I know you're deeply connected to this conflict. We really appreciate you coming here, sharing us your thoughts, your hopes. You know, hoping we can bring you back at a better time and when things are not as catastrophic as they are right now. So I'd like the audience to please, you know, join me in thanking Amira Hass for being here today. And thank you to my colleague, Jonathan Lincoln. We have more events coming up over the next few weeks. You can find more information from our website. Thank you very much.